Oh, Queen Justice, where are you? Did they beat you up or no? Lock you underground, take the crown away from you?
Oh, Lady Liberty, red, white, and blue. Did they take your dignity with their bigotry? Teach you that you're born to lose.
Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough of all the rules you break. We've had enough of all the money you make. We've had enough, no more life at stake. We've had enough, this is a proclamation. It's been 400 years and we're 400 late. Together we stand from state to state. Going back in time won't make America great. We need justice now, people won't wait. Action, no more distraction. Every step we take, we gain traction. If it can happen to one, it can happen to all. United we stand, divided we fall. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough of all the rules you were breaking. We had enough of all the money you were making. We had enough, no more life gets taken. We had enough, this is a proclamation. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. You better believe, just roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough of all the rules you're breaking. We've had enough, all the money you're making. We've had enough, no more life gets taken. We've had enough, this is the proclamation. We've had enough. Trayvon Martin and Tommy Rice. We've had enough. Michael Brown and Eric gonna pay the price. We've had enough. Philando, Breonna, George Floyd. What? We've had enough. So many gone. How can we fill the void?
How can we feel?
We've had enough. John Crawford, I know you've heard. We've had enough. Sandra Bland, come on and take a stand. We've had enough. Sean Bell, what the hell? We've had enough. Freddie Gray, did you hear what I said? We've had enough. This is a proclamation.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. Always great to start with that music by Ryan. Ryan is a Minneapolis-based musician who worked with the Jonas Brothers. He was a mentee of my brother, Wayne McFarlane, from ipso facto. And in fact, Wayne is one of the first of the several singers in that song, We've Had Enough. And I think the song strikes a chord of agreement and consensus in us and among us. People are saying we've had enough, that enough is enough, sick and tired of being sick and tired. We hear that song later on today, the music of Gary Hines and the Sounds of Blackness. But all told, it's been a just high pressure roller coaster year. And what I wanted to do today was to continue focusing on the impact, the reflection on what I'm going to call right now, for the lack of better words, the year of George Floyd, looking at what's happened a year in the year since George Floyd was murdered here in Minneapolis. If you're watching the show on our YouTube channel, please subscribe and tell people about it, tell your friends who want to grow this experience. If you are connecting through Facebook, either through the Inside News Facebook channel or platform, like the show, give us your comments, your feedback, join the program. We want to hear your voice, share your voice. And if you're watching through our national network, the Black Press USA platform of National Newspaper Publishers Association, we thank you for being part of this as well. We want to grow that as well. Our goal is to connect with our people. You know, the vision here is this. We talk about local things here in Minnesota. We talk about them in a way that they reveal the same experiences, the same dynamic, the same strategies for solution making anywhere else in our community, in the diaspora, or on the planet. So our intent, our vision is to do the making the local global, making the global local, showing commonality, shared values, shared opportunity, and always focused on creating a community, a vision, a future, a narrative in which we as a people end up victorious winners. And to clarify along the way what winning means, I believe that our winning doesn't necessarily mean somebody else has to lose. In fact, I say that our winning is a winning that reflects that everybody and everything else has won as well. Our winning, therefore, is organic, it's cosmic, and it's a sense of everything being in order. Well, let me begin today by introducing a couple of friends who are with me today. My colleague and friend, and just a person I admire, Yusef Mjini, is here. Yusef, brother, always good to talk to you. And we're expecting a couple of more people to join us. Leslie is here. She's here. Leslie, good to see you. How you doing?
Fine, thank you, Al. Appreciate the invitation. Hello, Leslie.
Hello, hello. It's so good to see you both. Grace and peace.
Well, we'll be joined by one of our other attorney friends. He might or might not be able to join the program today. But I want to begin with this. And Leslie, I wanted to especially connect with you. I know you've got a time issue, but to ask you to talk about reflect on this past year. Reflections, whatever's on your mind. What are you thinking about when you go to bed at night and review both the day and the year? What ideas run through your mind and your head and your spirit?
I apologize. It messed up a little bit. Did you ask for my reflections 1 year later?
Right. Reflections on this year of George Floyd, from what happened, what the community's response was locally and globally, and the trial and where we are right now.
Definitely. I said May 25th, 2021. It felt like the new year, right? Because last year on May 25th, 2020 is when the world shifted, right? We know COVID-19 had everyone inside of their homes and kind of shut down the world. And Brother George Floyd's murder opened the world back up, right? It also put on glasses and a mirror to what Black people have been experiencing in the state of Minnesota and all over the world for too long, right? The knee that was on Brother George Floyd's neck is symbolic of the knees that's on all Black people's neck. Specifically here in Minnesota, you know, we have the worst racial disparity, one of the worst racial disparities in the nation. And so I am inspired by the way people are showing up and activated. I'm inspired that what Professor Okati says, you know, one good thing about the darkness is that it makes it easier for the lights to find each other. I think that there's a spirit of collaboration and understanding that we are all in this together. There has been so much loss, even when Chauvin was in his trial, to lose Dante Wright. For me, was also symbolic of that the struggle and the fight continues, right? One conviction isn't enough, right? We need correction in the education system, in the healthcare system, in all systems and institutions. And more importantly, poverty, right? Poverty that is infecting our community, that leads to so much crime, that leads to so much devastation. And we know this summer is going to be a tough one. We've lost one young little girl, and we are struggling to combat the gun violence that has harmed other young people in our community. And so for me, I often say, you know, we can hold the police accountable, and we can also strive for justice in our own communities as well, and make sure that resources are poured into young people. And so that's kind of where I'm at.
The question of accountability is a key one. And I sometimes people see there's a dichotomy. They say either we press against police oppression and resist that, but that means we allow them to not do policing and allow ourselves to be victimized, or they say that we simply don't need them. I think that's a false choice, and I think accountability really means how we have to be responsible in our own households. in our own persons, our own bodies, and our own choices, and at the same time, keep all the institutions of government accountable. So it's not one or the other. It's not because we're so afraid we can let the police do anything they want to us. And it's not that we don't have a duty to be present and to resist failure within our community. What do you think?
No, I think you're exactly right. I think that we can acknowledge the roots of policing and slave patrols, and that it has been an institution of oppression towards Black people. And we can also acknowledge that we have one of the best police chiefs in the nation, Chief Arredondo, who has done the right thing time and time and time again, right? And so for me, and one important distinction, I have a number of people in my family who are on the police force, who have been on the police force, and I have respect for people who want to make their community safer. The reality of the situation is policing in America and in Black communities is often not for our protection or safety. We actually don't see the police preventing crimes from happening. They're called after the fact, or they are overseeing, over policing, and brutalizing our communities, right? No traffic violation should be a death sentence. No interaction in general with the police should be a death sentence. However, for far too long, it has been that, because the roots of something matters. If this institution was created to protect white property, or white people and their property, and to keep the social order, which white supremacy, the doctrine of white supremacy, is the social order in America. As a society, we have issues that we really have to address. And I don't think we can just use the police as a scapegoat, because this entire system needs to be revamped.
You were head of the Minneapolis NAACP. You recently sort of not retired, but turned the reins over to another capable young leader. Let me tell people that you're a lawyer and an organizer and an entrepreneur, and you're wearing one of your brands, Don't Complain, Activate. Talk about Leslie Redmond. Just give people an idea of who you are, Leslie, and whose shoulders you stand on, what your vision is for community and humanity, and where your passion directs your activity.
And thank you, Mr. McFarlane. And before I can begin, can I just say thank you to you and Insight News and everything that you all are to this community. Black media matters and is so important. And thank you all for giving us this platform. Brother Youssef, thank you for all that you've done in the NAACP and in the community. And so we talk about whose shoulders I stand on. It's very important to recognize that we have so many elders in the community who have been doing this work and who have been pushing the needle further. And one of the reasons, so I became the youngest president in the history of the Minneapolis branch at the humble age of 25. And ironically enough, when I transitioned the branch over to Angela Rose Meyer, she was 25, right? So this is just like God ordained. And one of the reasons why I thought that that was so important is because I'm an attorney. I'm the founder of Don't Complain, Activate. I do a lot in the community, and I believe in leadership. I believe in power being shared and distributed, and us not holding it on for our own purposes. Some people felt like it was at the prime time, and I felt like it was at the prime time to transition. I'm still very much involved in the NAACP. I'm a lifetime member. But at this time, I am really building out Don't Complain, Activate. We are fundraising right now to get this activation bus up and running for the summertime. We're turning a traditional RV into a community activation bus, which will be an education and engagement center. Brother Youssef probably remembers when I was the education chair for the Minneapolis NAACP. And one of the things that we realized is that cultural curriculum is missing in our institutions a lot of the time, or I should say in their institutions of public schools. And so we want to educate young people about the NAACP, the history of Black people here in Minnesota. We're working in collaboration with NICCAT, the Network for the Development of Children of African Descent, who has wonderful home learning kits that we're going to be passing out this summer to families who potentially cannot afford it. We're going to be starting up a YouTube channel YouTube channel that's going to be very educational and Black focused. Where when we parked in the parking lot of Shallow Temple International Ministry, always putting God and the church at the centerpiece, working with the community healing team. I believe in collaboration. So you all make sure you check out that GoFundMe, invest in that. You can also check out my merchandise, Don't Complain Activate, at leslieredmond.com. And the GoFundMe is actually on leslieredmond.com as well. We're almost at the $30,000 mark, and we're raising $70,000 to get this up and activated.
Congratulations, so much energy. When I met you first, I think my friend Doris Slaughter introduced me and Bobby to you at an event that you had organized down in the Harrison neighborhood. I think you were acting director or organizer for that community, and you were in school and you were working, and you were like, I call a classic Jamaican. I'm a Jamaican, and Jamaicans pride themselves in having 15 jobs at one time and not complaining. And so you came with that spirit, and I admire that and love that in you. Yusuf, jump in here, brother. You know, when I see a young Leslie Redmond, I think about a young Al McFarlane and a young Yusuf Mjini, because you and I were in this a long, long time. We met probably you both were like 24, 5 years old when we met, right? And took to the streets and
started the Twin City Black Communications Group. Way back when, 1970.
And so what was our conversations back then? This is for Leslie's sake. How do we approach the world, as you remember, and what passion, what thought, what vision did we articulate that we tried to guide ourselves with?
Well, we agreed that if we couldn't see positive images of Black people, we needed to be positive images of Black people. And you got a grant from the Housing and Redevelopment Authority, of which Harry Davis was the chair, to start a shopper, which it was the birth of Insight News. Mm-hmm. And Vus Musi Zulu, Mahmoud Al-Khatib, myself, Kambon Kamara started what was then called Dudes on a Stem. It became Radio for Black People, the Pan-African Network on KUXL. We started Harambe on Channel 11. We started, on the other hand, the Urban League program on KSTP. We had another TV program on Channel 11, and we were all over the map. I was literally writing editorials for all 6 of the Black newspapers in the Twin Cities at the same time. And we, in fact, even held, I don't know if you remember, the conference at the Black House at McAllister College back when Gary Hines was a student and a football player over there when the Sounds of Blackness were first formed back in the 1970s, called Where There Is No Vision, the People Perish, on the crisis in Black leadership, and invited the heads of all of the African American service organizations in the Twin Cities to come and hear all the young bucks talk about the crisis in Black leadership in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And we were organized. Vusi Zulu raised the funding to send more than 10,000 transistor radios to the Sudan. We organized around the 6th Pan-African Conference. We sent a delegation. We were doing a lot of work around African liberation. We organized African Liberation Day celebrations, Malcolm X's birthday, Liberation Day. We brought speakers in here. We brought Joseph Benjo-Cannon, John Henrik Clark, Ivan Van Sertima, Francis Cress Welsing. We brought Francis and Val Gray Ward in from Chicago. We couldn't bring enough Black scholars in here to enlighten people. And when they came in, they swore it was going to be the only time they came to the Twin Cities, because we had them speaking at churches, fraternities, sororities, at people's houses, in backyards, and at community centers. And from the time they got off the plane until the time we put them back on the plane, they spoke about 12, 15 times. We wore them out. We got both sides of our dollar and the edges. But we were busy, and we were planting seeds, and they bloomed earlier and some people later than others, but we were trying to share information and encourage people to get involved in the community. And, we were doing God's work. Absolutely.
I love that there is this vision of Pan-Africanism that we talked, we shared, and we embraced. And I look at that, and I look at, Leslie, your generation's contribution to the world in the form of hip hop music, and not so much the music, but the spirit of hip hop. From my understanding, is a spirit of we can do this ourselves. We don't have to beg or ask. We simply have to, and we don't have to complain. We have to activate, right? I think that characterizes this can-do attitude inside young people, your generation, and the evidence is the prolific expansion of the culture globally. And the language of the world now is becoming hip hop. The music of the world is becoming hip hop, reggae, alternative music, all of that building out of the jazz, the creative genius of Africans in the new world, of Black people in this country. And so what do you see as a connection? I want you to talk about your generation's view of its role in humanity on the planet Earth. I think the Earth is at stake.
Amen.
and at risk.
Yes.
And I think that we have an obligation and a duty, and we have the opportunity to bring a different understanding, bring a value that can be a solution for all humanity. And I'm saying we Black people have that power and have that right. What do you think, Leslie Rutman?
I agree 100%. If I could start off by quoting a rapper, his name is Little Baby. He said, "It's bigger than black and white. It's a problem with the whole way of life. Can't change overnight, but we got to start somewhere. Might as well go ahead and start here. We done had a hell of a year. I'm going to make it count while I'm here." Right. And what I love is that was like the song of the summer that was obviously inspired by the murder of Brother George Floyd. And he didn't stop there. He went on to having Tamika Mallory, an activist, perform with him at his Grammy performance and elevate people who are fighting on the ground. And then on Brother George Floyd, the anniversary on May 25th, he went with the George Floyd family and the National NAACP to the White House to meet with politicians, right? And so what I see is hip hop artists are really emerging themselves in this fight. And that's just one example. But I think the point that he made was so true. If we could get back to our roots and our foundation, we know that white supremacy is not just an attack on Black people, but it's an attack on humanity, right? And it distracts us from being able to really live out our God-given purpose and what
and it hurts white people too.
Exactly, 100%. And so as a human race, we have suffered so much. And, I always try to put it in the context so people understand Black liberation is bigger than just benefiting Black people, right? When we can stop focusing on white supremacy, that's going to benefit the earth, right? As you're talking about, because we can get back to why we're here and what we need to be doing.
For real. Thank you. For real.
Build on that, Yusuf, this idea of our place in the family of humanity as creators.
Well, Al, I always like to think of the fact that James Baldwin wrote an essay called "The Price of the Ticket." And he said that every immigrant group that came to this country, as part of the price of the ticket, had to subscribe to the myth of white supremacy. And even the poorest of white people in the trailer park told their sons, when they had the bluest of the blues, that no matter how bad things got, that they could always take solace in the fact that they were not Negroes. Okay? No matter how bad things got, son, you can always remember you're not a Negro. Okay? They didn't use such polite language. But
right.
We have not only survived, we have developed, because we are the most resilient people on this planet. No other race of people have survived and continued to develop what we have been submitted to since 1619 on this planet. And if you read Isabel Wilkerson's book, she goes back to the 20 Negroes who arrived, the Africans who arrived on the good ship Jesus, the Dutch ship that anchored in the mouth of the James River in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. Okay, there were no slaves in Africa. There were Africans who were brought to this country and enslaved. And we need to correct that language because people talk about slaves coming from Africa or slaves being in Africa. Didn't happen. You know, that's a misnomer and brings it forward. The Germans, the Nazis, went to South Africa, went to Australia to try and determine how best to deal with Jewish people in Germany. And they came to America and they said, my God, these people are hundreds of years ahead of the rest of the planet, the way that they deal with Black people in law, in policy, and in everyday practice. We got to do what they do, okay? And IBM provided the system with which they tattooed Jewish arms and tracked Jewish people. And Coca-Cola provided the bottling, and Ford provided the truck plants. And they did everything that occurred in the United States except one thing. They said, we won't go as far as the Americans did by defining Jews with the one-drop rule, the way that they identify Black people in America. And this is the archetypal form of oppression and discrimination and white supremacy on the planet, okay? Here in America, and we have survived and we have developed. And I think that nowhere else on earth have people been submitted to and come out whole as African Americans have in this country, okay? And we need to recognize that. And I don't say take pride in that. I say recognize that, okay? Because it will take as many generations as we suffered in order to fully cleanse and purify ourselves of the sin of slavery and dehumanization that we went through, okay, that our women went through, that our children, our parents, our extended families, of those who died in the Middle Passage only to have the captain put in the ship's log jettisoned cargo, okay, that we were property. We were 3/5 of a human being, okay, and you look down through history at the travesties that have been paid against our people, the lynchings, the dehumanization, the rape, the human tragedy, the horror that was visited upon Black people with immunity, not just the Derek Chauvins. I mean, he's not even the tip of the iceberg in terms of the pain and the inhumanity that Black people have witnessed, okay, that we carry in our DNA today, okay? And the fact that we can stand with our backs straight, okay, that we can love one another, that we can forgive but not forget, okay, is testimony to our humanity, okay? And we are better instruments for living together with other people as a result of it, okay? Because we not only came through whole, we came through better people for it, okay? And I know of no other people that have come close to weathering it, surviving it, and developing in spite of it.
Leslie, I know you've got to run at some point in time, but stay as long as you can. And then our format is simply what we're doing now, is sharing from our heart and from the stories that we have created, that we live, and that we imagine. And, you know, as Yusef was speaking, he talked, and I'm hearing him saying the future requires probably the same number of generations that have gone through this trauma to cleanse ourselves and our spirits and our aura of the impact of the trauma. And so it leads me then to asking Leslie, in your mind's eye, in your heart, what is the vision of how would it feel? How would it look? Nina Simone said, I wonder how it looks, how it feels to be free. In her song, I think it said something like that. But as a young person, and as an intellectual and as a feeling person, what's your vision of what it's like if we were free of the trauma and had finally had all of that cleansed from our DNA, who would we be? Who are we truly, in your point of view?
Yes, in my point of view, we are sun people. We are lovers of humanity. We're lovers of art. We're lovers of food. I feel like I was privileged enough to get a glimpse of what this freedom felt like, right? So to add some perspective, my grandparents were from North Carolina, South Carolina, Houston, Texas. Born in the early 1920s, 1925, right? They were part of the Great Migration to the North. They migrated specifically to Washington, D.C. with fifth, sixth grade educations and started a better life for themselves, right? My parents had high school diplomas. I grew up in the inner city of DC. And when people ask me my favorite pastime, I tell them sitting on the front porch with Big Mom, right? Now, we lived in a predominantly Black neighborhood, went to predominantly Black schools. We had Black mayors, Black politicians, all that. Now, most of that has all been wiped away by gentrification, right? But taking you back to the neighborhood I grew up in. It's like everyone knew your name on the block. Kids felt protected. Yes, our communities had struggles, mainly because of the war on drugs and the things that have been brought in our community. But it was a real sense of community. It was a sense of love. It was a sense of we are enough, right? Our Blackness was not a liability, it was an asset. All the people in power we saw looked like us. Most of our teachers looked like us. We were taught about Emmett Till. We were taught in fourth grade that had us watch Roots, right? Like this was not a or this was not a separation from our education. This is a core part of our education. Understanding who we are, where we come from, and not just the roots, right? But understanding all of our developments from the pyramids to mathematics to astrology and everything in between, right? And so for me, once we get healing, once we get resources, once we get back to our version of wealth, right? Not white people's and white supremacy version of wealth. I'm not talking about finance, but I'm talking about health. I'm talking about happiness. I'm talking about joy. I'm talking about recognizing that we are everything that we need and everything that we've been waiting for, right? And so for me, it's about the internal peace and not looking for other people's characteristics of wealth and not thinking that our hair isn't good enough, not thinking that the melanin that we've been gifted isn't good enough, but recognizing the beauty in all of that and being able to be whoever we want to be, whether that's artists, whether that's poets, whether that's doctors, building up our own Black Wall Streets where we have our own museums, our own hospitals, our own everything. And being able to protect ourselves and not having our communities destroyed.
You said
Actually, that sounds a lot like North Minneapolis and Rondo, quiet as it's kept, because I didn't have a white teacher till I got into high school. And, I went to a Catholic school and we had Black nuns and we had Black doctors and Black nurses and Black pharmacists and Black tailor. And, we were in a segregated bubble in the hood on Rondo. And it was the same thing on the north side. It was the same thing on the south side, and had the Black papers. Very, very similar experience, Leslie. So I understand exactly where you're coming from.
You said, can I ask you a question? I'm
Sure.
sorry. I just wanted to ask, how do we sustain that in America, right? Because we've had it here, we've had it in DC, and then the gentrification comes and wipes it out. How do we sustain it? How do we help? Because I see there are places like Baltimore, there are places like Detroit where there's still a majority Black people. We know so many places in the South, still majority Black places. How do we build and sustain those places?
Yusuf, before you answer, Yusuf, let me throw one more piece in there to complicate it. And I'm thinking about what I heard Jerry Rawlings say. And he was speaking at some convention on TV, but to Black Americans in particular. And he was saying, I know you love Africa, you want to come home, but you are where you are for a reason. And you have a role to play in the history of humanity. And that role you are fulfilling. So on the one hand, Leslie, we talk about the damage we experienced by desegregation and integration, how it really hurt us more than helped us. But bear in mind that suggestion by uh, President Rawlings of Ghana. You're on a mission, and this mission is a painful mission. It's 400 years of pain. But is there an end game that we have to say uh, uh, made this worth it for all of our people and for humanity? So, Yusuf, go ahead.
Well, I'll take it a step further. Ron Karenga said, you can't leave here until you can eliminate this man's ability to follow you wherever you go and harm you. Okay. And if Al, you remember the McFarlane Act that was passed in Congress that said we're going to build interstate freeways directly through Black communities. We're going to lower them 30 feet below the grade level so that if we ever need to have concentration camps in the central city, we will use the interstate highways and we can put the armed forces above ground and herd people down onto the interstate and keep them there at will. That's why the interstate is recessed when it goes through the hood, okay, so that they have somewhere to corral and contain us in times of urban unrest. And now people go down there and block traffic and don't understand that. Leslie, I think we start in the family, okay? Do families gather and eat together on Sunday and spend time together, or do they just go in their separate directions? You know, do people support Black businesses within the African American community, or do they take their money and go somewhere else? Okay, because the dollar don't stay in our community but 15 or 20 minutes when people get paid, and it goes elsewhere. But that money doesn't come into our communities and get distributed like it does out there. So I think, how do we maintain that? Those freeways went through our community because they were defined as the path of least resistance. And there's a book called Democracy in Chains that talks about the 30-year plan that right-wing conservatives put together to seize control of the Supreme Court, state legislatures, and Congress to implement the dystopian bipartisan polar politics that we see in Congress today and control of the Supreme Court. It wasn't accidental. It was well planned, beginning with the defeat of Barry Goldwater. They said, we need to make sure that this does not happen again. And they said, look, there is no quick fix. This is a long-term game plan, okay? And it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. And they have succeeded, okay? That made Donald Trump possible. And if lightning strikes Donald Trump and he dies tomorrow, there will be another just like him coming down the pipe. These folks are serious. And if we don't get serious about maintaining our own self-determination, we're going to be right back where we started from 3 years from now. And I'm dead serious about that.
Can I just add to that?
Because 40 states have voter suppression bills that have already passed. And they're trying to keep poor people and people of color from the polls so they can do whatever in the world they please, okay, without us having anything to say about it. And they're serious as cancer about our not having a voice in the body politic.
I just want to add, because I think you're dead on point. You're right on point with the Black family. And I think about yesterday, I was at the time of reckoning. I was able to sit with Professor Okati, and Bishop Howell was there, and TT, and so many wonderful, and it was young people. It was an intergenerational conversation. And the young people said, this is so amazing because we rarely ever get to sit with the elders and be able to build in a meaningful way. Sister Tish Jones had another event that was called a Sunday dinner virtually, right? And it was over 50 people on the call. And we were just able to build and look at the food, and the Cotmans were on there, and so many people. And for me, the Black family is beyond your own blood relatives, right? Because that's one thing we always knew. When you see a Black person, you're supposed to look at them as family. And when I think about the South and the North and the East and the West Coast, all Black people looking at each other as family. And I talk to so many young people, there's a huge disconnect. They don't know the Black businesses that exist. They're not eating healthy. We're not pouring in, and we're missing the mark a lot of the time because there's a disconnect. I had a big mom who was elder and really helped raise us while my parents were working. But we don't even have those like distinctions now because the grandparents are still working and the kids are being left to raise themselves in a lot of communities. And so I'm very excited to see us get back and continue to be this family unit that we need to be.
Yeah, but like I said, we used to bring Ron Karenga and Hakeem Madabouti and Francis Cress Welsing, people like that. We'd bring them in every other month. We would record them. We would play back their remarks on the radio. Now we're bringing in people like Don Lemon. Okay. My goodness gracious. It's an embarrassment. Okay. And they have 500 white people come out to hear him and think that's the voice of the black community. It's an embarrassment. Absolute embarrassment. I'm sorry. We got to do better than that. And we don't have the institutions that are capable of bringing these kind of people and this kind of information. And so a lot of people are uninformed. They don't know what's going on. And in terms of, you mentioned all of the shooting that's going on downtown Minneapolis and St. Paul weekend before last, we had 3 shootings within 2 hours, 170 shots fired, 7 people went to the hospital. These kids believe that they have nothing to lose, and they're all armed and dangerous. And I have been critical of old men in robes trying to describe behavior for young people that they're no longer capable of performing. And I think it's critical that we get young people engaged in the discussion about their own behavior and the solutions to the kind of self-destructive behavior that they're performing.
Preach.
Okay?
I've been
Because, people like Spike, people like the Ambassadors Program over here in St. Paul, we have people who do speak and relate to these young people that need to be engaging them and working with them. When I was the president of the Urban Coalition, Jerry McAfee came to see me, and I funded the first gang truce meeting in McAfee's church to get the 2 gangs to come together to agree to stop shooting one another, And that wasn't why the Urban Coalition was formed, but I couldn't think of a good reason not to provide the money to bring these 2 groups together to stop shooting at one another, because a lot of kids were getting shot in the process that had nothing to do with it. And we see that that's still happening today. And this was 30 years ago. And we're still, trying to combat the same nonsense. 2-year-old babies. We had a 2-year-old child get shot in the brain here, sitting in the back of her daddy's car over on the east side of St. Paul, because somebody was following them, shooting at that. And one of the bullets went past the car that the young brother was shooting at and hit the car in front of it. And the people in front of the car that was being shot out pulled their guns out and were shooting at the car behind them that the third car was shooting at. It was crazy. Everybody shooting at everybody else. Nonsense.
And so, Leslie, what are you hearing? You're closer to the group than we are, and maybe through your circle, you are hearing the thinking, of the 14 and 15 and 16-year-olds that are armed and operating in a maddening way, careless, callous way with guns. What's being said on the street right now? And I know this is not as good as asking a 14-year-old. That's what Yusuf just said. Al McFarlane needs to talk to kids that are 14, 15, 16 and give them a voice and hear them speak about the world that they see themselves navigating in. But what are you hearing from where you sit, Leslie?
And I would say it's not just the young kids. I think they get the bad rep for everything, but I think it's the 20s and 30-year-olds too, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think that we've done a good job with conflict resolution in our community. I think that our communities have been infested with these guns that a lot of them don't even know how to use, and
Right.
that's why the wrong people are getting shot, right? Like, these kids are not intending to kill a lot of these young babies that are getting caught in the crossfires,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of them don't know what they're doing. And again, I can't separate that from the intentional, right? What I heard Brother Yusuf saying was the intentional destruction of the Black community. When you have a rallying up and you arrest a whole generation of Black men and women, and there's no hierarchy, there's no leaders, there's no structure, right? A lot of this stuff is being done, and really a lot of the violence that I hear is people retaliating for people who have already been killed, right?
Mhm,
So they're
mhm.
not fighting over, and again, young brothers, I'm not trying to speak on y'all behalf. I'm just speaking on what I see. They're not fighting on based on land or money anymore, right? We know at one point it was drugs, it was money. No, a lot of it is they don't know how to solve conflict. So if somebody look at people the wrong way, people say the wrong thing to things, people are lashing out. And it's the girls too. Let me say this while I'm on here. Amen. There is no money and resources being put into young black girls. And it has been an increase in black girls and women being arrested. There's been an increase in violence among girls. There's been an increase in killing. And we're not even going to get into the domestic violence and everything that's been increasing amongst black women. But like for me, that's why I think the healing is very connected to this. The mediation, the de-escalation, like I've resolved so many conflicts. Every time I'm in North Minneapolis, there's a conflict I'm resolving or a situation that I'm de-escalating because the tensions are so high. And a lot of this is caused by our trauma, right? And so for me, when we talk about who's still responsible, that's why reparations is so important. That's why it's getting the resources and the help and the nurturing that we need is so important. That's why you know this is work. This is not something that's just going to happen because we will it to happen, right? This is going to take resources, and what I don't see is the resources to be able to heal our community, to be able to pour into our young people. They're literally being left, and the education system is just warehousing them. They're not loving them, they're not pouring into them. And that was my whole idea with this activation bus, right? Is a place of wraparound services and love and education and pouring in. I think about grandmothers' houses and big mom houses and people just having places to be able to go. You see, they turned the way into the fourth precinct,
Yep,
and you wonder where the disconnect.
Yeah.
yep.
Like
Wasn't
the
hardly an accident.
it's not an accident at all. And so we cannot act like there's no community centers, right? Really, barely any. We don't even see as many basketball courts, and young people have energy, naturally so. And there used to be people to help them direct that. And I don't want to act as if there's no one doing work because there's so many good people doing work, right? Shout out to Jamil Jackson and Run and Shoot, and shout out to Coach McKenzie and what he does with the young boys, and a dear like a mother's love.
Mhm.
There's Nita has Project Divas. I'm not saying that they aren't people. I'm saying that the resources don't align with the problems, right? And if we actually wanted to solve them and be able to really pour into young people in meaningful ways. And so, like again, we struggle to get these proactive resources, but then when it comes to policing, people are willing to put in millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, right? But when we say these prevention and these proactive resources are going to actually help with public safety as well, the ears are not as open.
Yusuf, you mentioned what the communicators did early on, helping, for example, send radios to Sudan. And it made me think of one thing, and I'm going to add one more level of complexity to this conversation. That is, one of the interviews that I remember most was one of several I did with Vice Commander Riek Machar. Riek Machar was the vice commander of Sudanese People's Liberation Army. He was the vice chair of Sudanese People's Liberation Party, movement, the political movement. And he tells the story of how he and John Garang, both professors at the university in Khartoum in Sudan, were sick and tired of being castigated, their communities being marginalized by the regime in Khartoum. He described the regime in Khartoum as Arabized Africans, Arab Africans. And I said, who are these people? He said, well, they look like you. I said, what do you mean? They look pretty much just like you. And I came to realize later the connection between Arabized Africans and Americanized Africans, or African Americans and African Arabs. And it suggested an affinity, a connection to an ideology, a culture, and a history that didn't originate within Africa, but from outside that an allegiance and a preference. So that's one part. Second part of this picture I'm painting, Yusef, is he talked about how they went to the bush and led a 20-year war against the government regime in Khartoum. And the cost of that was 5 million lives.
Yeah.
He was particularly, at that point when I interviewed him, concerned about how they reintegrate. War had stopped. How do they now reintegrate several 100,000 10, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds back into the civil society? Because for the past number of years, those children have been children bearing arms.
Mm-hmm.
I raise the question because of this. We know that there's a capability of placing guns in the hands of children or anybody else. Horrific things can happen and do happen. And as they struggled with the idea of reorienting the children to a peace and community life, I'm thinking about, what do we do with children in our community, number one, who are induced into the culture of violence. But the other half of that, Yusef, is to recognize there is a phenomenal power in young people that can be directed or misdirected, however you choose to call it, into an arena that is catastrophic. And sometimes it's done intentionally, or maybe people drift into it. But right now, we're at a very small edge of something that could escalate into something massive and horrific. And there are people that would like to see more Black boys and girls with guns shooting each other and hoping that at some point in time they start shooting white people, giving white people the excuse to come and destroy Black people en masse. And there's a sense that an outcome of that would be certainly massacre, or what do you call it, genocide. I'm going way deep here, more than I thought I would go, but it's in my mind. What do you think, Yusef?
Are you still involved with the Urban League, Al?
Not directly, but yes.
I want to tell you a story, and I'll try and do it quickly. You remember Don Fraser was mayor of Minneapolis?
Sure.
Don and I were talking one time, and he came up with an idea. He was going to convince General Mills and International Multi-Foods and Honeywell and some of the other major employers in Minneapolis to hire one hard-to-employ young man in North Minneapolis for every 100 people they had in the workforce, one out of every 100 employees. And they would hire this person for $10, $12 an hour. And if they had good attendance over the first 6 months, they'd get a $2 an hour raise. And if they got their GED during the first year, they'd get another $2 an hour raise. And if they had a good work performance record, they'd give them another $1 an hour raise. Because, as I said earlier, a lot of these young bucks feel like they got nothing to lose. But if they had a job that paid a living wage, and they could see opportunities for some advancement, they might not, want to lose that.
Mm-hmm.
And so Don went around, and people liked the idea, and it picked up a little traction. And they said, "I'll tell you what, Mr. Mayor, you're one of the largest employers in Minneapolis. We'll do it if you'll do it." Okay? And he went back to the city council, and he said, "Listen, folks, we've got this great idea and this great plan. All we have to do is start the ball rolling and pick up the momentum by hiring one hard-to-employ young person in North Minneapolis for every 100 employees we have in the city of Minneapolis." You know what the city council said? No bet to us. They refused to do it. And the whole idea died right then and there. So I think that leadership in the African-American community in North Minneapolis has the momentum and the capacity to put the pressure on the white power structure to do something like that. Like one employee for every one. If they hired one employee from North Minneapolis, that hangs out on Broadway and Lindale or wherever, for every 100 employees they have, there would be no unemployment problem on the north side and the south side. Okay? It wouldn't hurt their pocketbook or their bottom line, and it would raise the quality of life for the entire city. Okay? So there are ways to address this issue. The trick is ramping it up to scale. Okay? Because we've got we've got programs that take a little nibble of it over in Powderhorn, and they take a little nibble over in Harrison, and a little nibble out by Sabathani. But we need to take a gulp out of this issue. The same thing with housing, same thing with education, same thing with parenting, same thing with criminal justice. And there are ways to address that, but we got to get it up to scale. And Leslie, I think that's what you were saying. And we need to have this conversation about reparations, because a lot of people keep looking in the mailbox every morning for reparations to come in the form of a check. And if they do, Cadillac dealer's going to do big business. Okay. So we need to have a conversation about exactly what reparations is and what it ought to look like.
Brother Yusuf, if I could just say that, I love that idea. And I think that the momentum is here for it now. Right?
Yeah, let's put that on George Floyd's table, and because on the wake of George Floyd, when Philando Castile died, bless her heart, Diamond Phillips turned the phone on and with poise, was talking to the officer with respect. Yes, sir, I did do what you told me, officer, but Philando Castile was dying. He had already been shot. When George Floyd was dying, that little 17-year-old sister was on it, and that Asian cop was shifting his body trying to block her from filming him. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, okay? Because we had seen Breonna Taylor and Jamal Clark and everybody else, Philando, but and that cop, what? I told you why he had his hand on his hip, because if you press on your hip, on your thigh, you put twice as much pressure on the victim's neck, okay? Kill him twice as fast. Yeah. And so that was the straw that broke. Boy looked like he was on a coffee break. Just nonchalant, having a good time. And we've got a tailwind behind us now called George Floyd. And we need to take advantage of that tailwind and try and make a difference that's going to last, because future generations are looking at us and they're going to judge us by whether or not the community is a more beautiful place as a result of the efforts that we make than it was when they were born into it. Okay? So we got a lot of work to do.
Leslie, go ahead. Final words from you. Leslie, go ahead.
I just want to say God is good, and everything, I'm so inspired by the ancestors, and for those brothers and sisters that are still alive. We need as many of these stories and as much as this information, because we only know what we know and the people around us know. And I had never heard that story before, what Brother Yusuf said. And I think that that's a great idea. And Brother Yusuf, please contact me, or I need to get your number, because we can push that idea right now in Minneapolis. And I think that we could actually get it to work. And so
1 out of 100.
1 out of 100.
That's all it is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we should, that's a number. Well, listen, thank you both, Leslie Redmond. Thank you so much for who you are and what you're doing, and for all the people that have poured themselves into you through the generations since the beginning of time, and to bring you to this moment. Yusuf, brother, thank you for being yourself and being here, being present, being a force and a light in the world and in our community and in your family. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we talk with veterans. Actually, my guest tomorrow is a 101-year-old veteran, Ray Robinson, who was trained by Buffalo Soldiers, and he and other veterans are joining me at the Healing Circle with the African American Child Wellness Institute, our regular Friday program. You join us too. It'll be a rich, wonderful conversation. Take care.
us.